The world of digital marketing moves at a dizzying speed. Strategies, budgets, tactics, buzzwords. How can we even begin to distinguish the signal from the noise, the good moves from the bad? Take it from the team that's tripped as much as we've triumphed. We're putting our best moves in the spotlight and spilling every secret to give you step-by-step instructions to steal for your own success and digitally scale your business. This is Marketing Moves.
Welcome back to another episode of Marketing Moves. I'm your host, Ashton Morris, Senior Account Executive and Strategic Partnerships Lead at Vivid Front. Today, I'm joined by Anthony Manna Jr., President of Hello Sunray and Vice President of M7 Holdings. In this episode, we're diving into Anthony's entrepreneurial journey over the last decade, what shaped his mindset as a builder, and how he's helping businesses rethink energy through solar innovation. He brings a strategic operator's perspective on growth, risk, and long-term impact. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us today. To kick things off, can you give us a bit of background on yourself and what ultimately led you to founding Hello Sunray?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I grew up in Akron. I went to Ohio State for undergrad. My father's an entrepreneur, which I think we'll get into in a little more detail, but I grew up watching him be an entrepreneur my whole life. I was always interested in it. So when I was in college at Ohio State, I actually joined a software startup, and that was my first intro into the entrepreneurial world. And I kind of just loved it. I loved pursuing building something that is a difficult mental challenge that could potentially improve the world. And so I started doing that. You know, we made a lot of mistakes at that point in time, but, you know, I gained a love for entrepreneurship at that point in time. I left undergrad. I went and did another startup. Then I left there and worked for a startup. I went to grad school at Case Western. I got my MBA there and then did another startup, this time consulting with small businesses and helping them with business planning, strategic planning and stuff around Northeast Ohio. And then, you know, each step of the way I was making further progress, but I wasn't quite getting over the hump of where I wanted to be. And so I decided, you know, I jumped right into the entrepreneurship world. I should probably go work a quote, real job for a while. And so I went and did management consulting with a local company here called Clear Consulting. Did that for about 4.5 years, got some exposure to larger companies, a little more established organization. And then at a certain point when I hit 30, I realized that I want to work with my family. So I gave my dad a call and joined our family investment office, which is called M7 Holdings. And the first investment that we made was Hello Sunray. So that's kind of the journey to get there.
A lot to unpack there. But my first question as a follow-up would be, what were some of the biggest takeaways from startup life?
Good question. A couple things. One is, you know, I would say that the biggest mistake that most first-time entrepreneurs make is that they think they're smarter than the market. They think their idea is so brilliant that as long as they just build it, then everyone's going to pay them for it. You hear the glamour stories of, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and these guys that were young and built these billion-dollar businesses, but the reality is that you're not smarter than the market, and so you have to go out and ask the market, what do you want? What do you like? And be willing to adjust accordingly. So that would be a big learning lesson that I learned in my first startup is ask your customers what they want before you do it. But otherwise, I would say you have to be prepared. It's not as glamorous and sexy as it sounds. You have to be prepared that you're kind of suffering is probably a strong word, but you're struggling for an extended period of time to really create value. You have to be willing to like take a step back and struggle a little more than maybe some of your peers who are at a salaried job with benefits for a period of time. Of course, the goal is the upside, and is that if you pull it off successfully, you might have a better tail at the end than some of your peers. But if you're entering it just because you like the sexy idea of going and building some billion-dollar business and making it easy and not having to work a quote real job, it's not the right reason to be in it.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get more into what you're doing with your family, but I'm curious, what's your favorite thing about working with family?
My favorite thing, you know, I feel like it gives me a purpose, a good backdrop purpose, I should say. Every job is hard at times. You get frustrated with your boss, your coworkers, or just the day-to-day. And being a part of a company that is my family, anytime I do get that level of frustration, it's like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, you know, this is my backdrop. These are the people that are the most important to me. And that gives me some motivation to continue pushing whenever times do get tough.
Oh, yeah. It's especially nice to obviously have that built-in community, and also you're all working towards the same thing. And it's amazing, obviously entrepreneurship runs in the family, and is Hello Sunray, like you said, is owned by your family's investment office, M7 Holdings. So I'd love to understand better its origins and evolution. Walk me through how it started and where things stand today.
Yeah, so my dad, Tony Manna, he started a law firm about 25 years ago called Brennan Manna Diamond. Around the same time, he started a real estate developer called Signet. Both of them are based in Akron, but have presence, throughout the country now. And over the years, my dad and his partners were acquiring various manufacturing and chemical businesses, all kind of under the Signet umbrella for many years. People started to ask, as the real estate development company started to get its own brand recognition, what do these other companies have to do with it? And a lot of times it was really just the entrepreneurial bug that my dad and his partners had. It didn't really have anything to do with the real estate developer. And so over time, he was starting to think, how can we carve this out? Signet was starting to have national brand recognition for their work with student housing and hospitals and things like that they did with different universities. How can we carve everything else out and let Signet stand alone? And, he was getting into his 60s, starting to think about generational planning. So around that time that I mentioned earlier that I made the choice to come work for the family, we kind of launched M7. It was an idea that I'd say we're still ideating and kind of fleshing out what it's going to look like long term. But that was kind of the start of it. That was around 2022. And this Sunray business, which I know we're going to get more into, was our first official investment under that umbrella. But we have 3 pillars under M7 Holdings. So there's M7 Ventures, which is our private equity-esque majority control pillar, where we will acquire primarily manufacturing businesses, with Sunray kind of being the one that's a little bit outside of our thesis. And we actively operate those businesses. And then we have M7 Ace Neo, which is our venture capital investment arm. So there we'll do sidecar investing. So we work with a bunch of different organizations that would be a lead investor for a startup, and they're looking for someone to fill out the round. And so they'll kind of do the heavy due diligence, and we kind of lean on trusting their due diligence, the partners that we work with. And then if it's a good enough opportunity, they bring it to us, and we'll meet with the founder and we'll assess it and decide, we'll invest to help fill out your round here. And then the third pillar, of course, being M7 Signet. Again, that real estate developer does stand on its own now. It's done work all across the country, as I mentioned before. And a few of those companies that I mentioned that they were acquiring prior to M7's existence still technically fall into the Signet bucket, but we all kind of work together. We're all kind of on a campus down in Akron and have offices up here in Cleveland. And it's interesting for sure, but we're still figuring everything out for sure.
Yeah, you guys seem booked and busy, to say the least. What has been or still is your current role within the family office?
So I'm the vice president of M7 Ventures, the private equity one, along with a few other partners that are around my tier. Each of us are focused on one of the portfolio businesses. So I'm the president of Hello Sunray, the vice president of M7 Ventures, but 99% of my time is focused on getting the solar business going. I have another peer who is focused on one of our manufacturing businesses, technically an M7 employee, but 99% of his time focused on that manufacturing business. And then we have a boss that we report to that kind of oversees all the different businesses and is a nice layer between my dad and myself as well, because I love the guy, but it's good to be able to have some separation in the personal and the professional. So we all report up to Courtney Eaton, and so we all help each other out as much as we can. I mean, there's a few situations where there's been some synergies where we've been able to refer business to each other, or we're brainstorming, trying to solve a problem. Oh, I met this guy through my business. Let me make the intro, or whatever it is. We have weekly meetings where we talk about everything and try to brainstorm as much as possible. But in the short term, we're all focused on one individual portfolio business each to get that going. And what the future is going to hold remains to be seen, but that's where we stand right now.
All good things, no doubt. Obviously, you just walked us through the different subsets of the family office. I'm curious, how does diversification play a role in managing investment risks based off of how you guys have structured your office?
It's a good question. My dad is very big on diversification, and you'll see that across our portfolio. There's quite a variety in what we do, but not not radical differences in business models for the most part, with the exception of Sunray is kind of our first real service-based business outside of the real estate developer. A lot of manufacturing, even though they're in totally different industries. It's kind of a model that we as an organization are comfortable with and kind of have relationships in and understand how to improve and grow those businesses, but wide variety of industries from trailer manufacturers to rubber rollers to chemical production, things like that, a book bindery. So really across the board. And I think the idea behind it is that, there's industry risk, there's personnel risk, there's all kinds of things that can happen at any individual business level, even if you have the best and strongest business. If there are some factors that are affecting your industry and slowing things down, if you have a diverse enough array of businesses in different industries and even different models, some might be less affected by the industry. And so this one's pulling back, then perhaps this one is succeeding. And the idea is, my dad talks a lot about the mathematics of diversification. And that's a huge part of our venture capital investment strategy, but also just the overall portfolio. At a certain point, by having diversity, you're kind of de-risking yourself from any individual business where there might be a threat. You're kind of offsetting that. And so over time, you have enough investments, enough diversity, you're most likely going to see some success.
What's the overarching mission of M7 Holdings, and what impact have you already made so far since your inception?
Good question. The overall mission, I would say, as of now, is to transition some of the businesses that my father and his partners have set up into the next generation, whether that be through directly my immediate family, me and my siblings, and or professional management. He's getting towards the tail end of his active career. At least he always says he's never going to retire, but he's getting towards the tail end, and we need to start thinking about what comes next and how can we grow what's here and have a larger impact. One of the things that he has talked about throughout my entire life, he talks about it all the time, is how entrepreneurship is so important for creating jobs for your community, and where there's plenty of philanthropy you can do to give and donate, but he's really driven by creating jobs for people and believes that that is something that can help improve a community exponentially. So we've made investments in quite a few businesses here in Northeast Ohio. Not all of them are here in Northeast Ohio, but quite a few here. We've grown and scaled those, and that's led to people having more jobs. We've also made a point to make sure that all the people that are a part of our organization that are working for various companies have opportunities to potentially become an entrepreneur themselves, whether that's through a common ownership stake within the business or other upside opportunities, so that they can start to build their own wealth. So it's really about not just building wealth at the top there, but we really try to spread that out throughout all the employees of the organization and give people a path to improve their families and their family's path, and hopefully then have an impact on the community.
That's amazing. Philanthropy, though, is something you guys prioritize as well. Can you talk a little bit about your philanthropic efforts?
Yeah, so one of the things that we are working on developing under M7 is related to entrepreneurship, similar to what I just described, trying to set up a program. We're still working through all the details on this, but a program that works with young adults, ideally locally here in Northeast Ohio, that maybe came from an underprivileged situation where they don't have as many access to as many opportunities as others do. And rather than the concept of donate and, give a fish to someone, teach someone how to fish, that concept, I'm not sure exact parable, but the idea is, the idea is that we will teach people how to be entrepreneurs, and starting with whether it's paying for their education so they can get educated, giving them a job in one of our companies and giving them some opportunities to get exposure to an entrepreneurial organization, understand how a business works and operates, so that they're set up so that they can pursue their own entrepreneurial dreams someday and potentially pull themselves and or their families out of the situation that we're in. We feel like that's going to have more long-term exponential benefit than simply making a donation to feed someone for one day. Our hope is we can help some of these young, ambitious people that are, hey, this person could be very successful if they just got the opportunity. We would like to provide that opportunity to those people and let them capitalize.
Yeah, I think it's incredible what you guys are doing in the sense that you've identified a lot of people don't have access to the opportunity, but when they're presented with it, how do they maximize it? So you're helping them full circle, which I think is amazing. I'm excited to see that take shape over the coming years. A lot of what you've worked on within the family office ultimately translated into what you're building now with Hello Sunray. Walk us through the early days. What sparked the idea, and what specific pain points were you trying to solve with Hello Sunray?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, it was the first investment we made after I officially joined M7. And my dad kind of instructed us to go out and basically find a business that makes sense, and let's lean into it. Part of it was, for us to learn the business search and acquisition process, which he's an expert in at this point, us being, the younger people on the team, but also, we needed to start somewhere. And so we did a lot of research on a bunch of different industries, and, obviously there's some limitations to what we can set up and what we were capable of, so we filtered out that way. And through that research, it became abundantly clear that the green energy, renewables, however you want to phrase it, was a great industry to be in. It had a lot of long-term growth potential, but it was also a pressing need. The electricity costs have continuously gone up for a period of time. Power costs is a big pain point for people, and it's starting to get to the point where everyone's noticing it. And so we realized, hey, this is something that is obviously growing throughout the country. I mean, everyone sees various news stories about solar. A lot of times it's in California or Texas or in Arizona where there's a desert. We didn't see a lot of that in Ohio. And it's not to say that there's not. There are some great companies that have been operating longer than us in Ohio. But we saw an opportunity where this is a market that's going to be growing. There's a need and there's growing demand, even though when we started it, I would say we were definitely on the early end of demand within Ohio. So we started this business. We actually started in the residential solar space because we found some people, some consultants that we worked with that had some experience, and they basically taught us from scratch the basics of how to go about selling solar, how to model and design systems. At the time, we partnered with an install team that was kind of more of the expertise on the technical side while we were getting started and learning the basics of how to operate this. But it was really true entrepreneurship starting from scratch. I mean, I remember we put solar on my home early on, and myself and my business partner, along with a few more experienced people, were up on our roof putting bolts into the roof and putting panels on and things like that, because we wanted to learn really from scratch, how do you do this? What exactly are all the parts involved here? And that taught us how to do it. We learned about sales on the residential side and then eventually pivoted into commercial in 2024. But yeah, it started as simply go find a good business, and the industry economics and the market opportunity was kind of like what drove us into this specifically. And then as we started getting into it, we just self-taught ourselves and kept learning and developing, and here we are today.
All great stuff. I have to ask before we get into too much of the nitty-gritty, what's the meaning behind the name?
Great question. We worked with a marketing agency, Cagency, that helped us develop a brand, and we just went through a bunch of different names that we thought, we wanted to capture this idea of the sun, and it's a friendly brand that is memorable to some extent. So we went through a lot of different names. You'd be surprised how many names are already taken that you might think of off.
You're like, oh, this is a once in a lifetime idea.
Yeah.
It's taken.
So that was part of it. And then once we kind of went on to the word Sunray, we really liked it. We liked that it felt like it's like saying like there's optimism and it's opportunity here. And then our marketing company that we worked with proposed Hello Sunray. And we're like, it's kind of catchy. It's kind of a catchy phrase. Like you're waking up in the morning saying hello to the sun, and it's producing power for your house, your business. Yeah, we just tested it out with some people and got some positive feedback and landed on it.
Definitely very memorable. Like we've talked about, solar energy isn't new. Solar cells dated back to the 1880s, and the first silicone-based solar cell, which was developed at Bell Labs in 1954, really set the foundation for where we are at today. I did a lot of research on this. It was very interesting, so did a deep dive. But more than 70 years later, solar has now seen widespread commercial and residential adoption, but not without challenges. How would you describe the current state of the solar industry, and how is your team navigating it?
Great question. There's a term that I did not coin this term. We learned it, learning about the solar industry. It's called the solar coaster. And that's a very common term for people that work within the industry because, looking back even before we started this, there's been a lot of ups and downs in the industry. And a lot of that is driven by federal policy. So there's been times when they've had tax benefits and they've taken them away, and there's been investment at the federal level and they've taken them away. One thing that has been driving the industry consistently over all that time that's less, obvious than the tax impact is the cost of power. Utility systems were set up, utility grids were set up to, a lot of the infrastructure was set up to last 50 or 60 years. And over time, the infrastructure starts to wear down and they need to replace it. But you have different grids that are set up at the local level, at the state level, some of them crossing state lines, but there's different regulations and policies, and demand driving here is set up here. So my point being that the entire grid is set up kind of piecemeal. So there's not like across the country we have this unified strategy of how to set up a really efficient electric grid. And, I give a lot of credit to the utility companies. They get a bad rep, but it's a very complicated thing that they're trying to do. They're trying to set up a system that allows the right amount of power to be produced, but not too much power, because once the power is produced, it has to go somewhere. Trying to balance the demand that people have for power with how much they're producing at any given point in time. All that to say that the infrastructure over time starts to crumble, starts to not make sense. The investments required to replace it are expensive, and these utility companies are required to maintain them, but that costs money. So over time, as the infrastructure is starting to crumble, as the demand rises, we need more power, we need more infrastructure, we need better infrastructure. They are charging their customers in order to basically make up for the expenses that they're doing at the grid level. And that is to the tune of, since 1978, the average cost of power has gone up roughly 6% per year, every year since 1978. On average. 6% per year, the average cost per kilowatt hour. Now that's nationwide average, but that 6% number is not something where you're going to look at your bill and be like, this is 6% higher than it was last March. You're not thinking that closely, the $4 to $7 difference in your bill. But if you zoom out and you look 5 years ago and look at your same bill, you're like, that's higher than it was before. Mm-hmm. People don't notice. But now we're getting to the point where power costs are rising and rising and rising, and people are noticing. And in the past 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot of changes at the federal level for where they've phased out some of the more fossil fuel related production that we were doing that was producing capacity for the grid. At the same time, as demand is absolutely skyrocketing, higher than it ever has before. We're at the peak, the most electric demand there's ever been is right now in the present, and it's going to keep growing. A couple of drivers of that. Data centers is the big one we hear about all the time. That's a huge driver right now. That is, the utility companies were not prepared for how quickly the demand was rising on utility. But then you also think about, electric vehicles. Think about, even at the simplest, most basic level, access to a flat screen TV, a smartphone, all that stuff 15, 20 years ago was not everyone could afford that. It was a little more expensive. It was hard to get. Everyone has it now. Our world is becoming more electrified. So demand's rising, the infrastructure is crumbling. That all of that leads to, hey, we need to charge more money in order to continue to operate this utility company and provide our service to our people. So all that being said, the solar coaster, driven a lot by the federal regulations and policies, but the industry as a whole is continuously being moved forward by the cost of power at the utility level. And solar is ultimately an offset for the power that you're purchasing from the utility. And so the higher the cost of the utility is, the less that the federal policies, the tax benefits that are out there are really that important. Don't get me wrong, people still want them very much. They love them. It's a huge impact in the short term. It can make the difference between a 5-year payback and a 7 or 8 year payback. But every single year, the cost keeps going up and up and up, becomes less and less important. Ultimately, people are trying to get off this ever rising rate increases and gain some independence for their own power. So, you asked the status of the industry right now. I would say there was some recent federal changes with the new administration. They passed the One Big Beautiful Bill in July last year, I believe it was. And through that, they actually cut some of the tax credits to expire sooner than they were originally supposed to. And it was quite unexpected. Most of the industry was not anticipating even though this administration has generally been less environmental focused, we figured that because there is such a demand for power right now and we're in such an energy crisis across the country, they probably wouldn't cut out a capacity generating mechanism like solar, but they did. And so we respond to that. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of uncertainty. I know that a lot of residential businesses shut down because the economics don't make as much sense at the residential level as commercial now. We still have the tax credits on the commercial side until 2027. So as of now, the industry is actually thriving. But what we don't know is this driven by everyone's trying to get some projects in before the tax credits expire? Or is it driven more by the cost of power going up, or both? What's going to happen when the tax credits expire after 2027 remains to be seen.
Do you guys try to think past that? Or are you more so in the moment now? Because, like you said, once the tax credits phase out, or, maybe the demand for power, even though it's always going to increase given everything you've talked about, are you thinking that far out? Or are you just trying to really tackle the moment right now, since that kind of threw you all for a loop?
Yeah, great question. I would say absolutely we're thinking that far out, but it's a balance. We have a small team on the solar side. There's just 3 of us that are full time, and then some support on the M7 side that helps us kind of back office stuff. So that's always the balance, the chicken and the egg when you're a startup, right? It's like you got to survive and keep the lights on now, but you're also trying to build and grow. But we had, when all this information was coming out, even before they officially decided what the tax changes were going to be, there was rumors. And we had quite a few meetings, strategic planning on is our business even going to survive with this change? What's it's going to do? We started modeling out what are the economics going to look like for commercial customers if there is no tax credits involved. And going through that process actually gave us some confidence. We're like, wow, it's not as much of a slam dunk. Certainly, everyone would like some money back. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? But the return is still there, absolutely. And as the cost of power keeps rising, like I mentioned earlier, the tax benefits are going to become less important. So we leaned into, hey, short term, we're going to continue to try to sell as much as we can and get as much as we can in before the end of 27. What comes after that? We have theories, we have plans. Yeah. We're looking at potentially trying to diversify somewhat what we're offering, and or whether that's through a partnership, an acquisition of our own, or just developing out a new product or service within Sunray, so we're not fully dependent on the economics of the solar industry. You asked about diversification earlier. This is a good example of it. We're looking to somewhat diversify what we offer so that we aren't so affected by the solar coaster, the ups and downs. One of the areas that we have identified that a lot of people in the industry are talking about, and where I think the future is going to go, is it's called microgrids. So battery storage is becoming, there's more and more demand for it. We talked about, when I arrived here, the transformers that exploded in Cleveland recently, and people's power went down. That's happening more and more frequently all across the country, where the grid's going down because some of those factors I talked about earlier. They're having to keep up with infrastructure. They're trying to balance demand, whatever it is. Winter weather is another big thing that affects it a lot. The grid goes down. You can put solar panels on your roof, but your power's still going to go out, because the solar panels are only producing power, and you're either going to use that immediately or send it back to the utility grid. It's not storing power unless you have a battery. Oh. So for a lot of businesses, they can't afford to have downtime. If their machines go down, a lot of these businesses, it takes them hours, if not an entire day, to fire all their equipment back up. And if the machine goes down for just a minute, they're losing a ridiculous amount of money. So there's more and more demand for that backup power to kind of protect yourself. There's also some incentives from the utility companies because, like I said, they're trying to balance capacity, how much they're producing, and has to go somewhere. You produce electricity, it's just physics. Like the electricity has to go somewhere. It can't just go into the air. Yeah. They need to release it somewhere. Yeah. So there's some incentives from utilities that are starting to come out that is like, if you have battery storage and you allow that battery to be some capacity for our grid, where if we're looking to shoot power somewhere, we can shoot it into your battery, and they'll actually pay businesses for that. So I would say that's where, like, the self-generation with your own battery storage, your own power, whether that's all from solar or other areas, is kind of the buzz right now. It's where it's like it becomes less about just the payback of offsetting utility costs and more about the almost subjective benefit of resiliency. and protecting your business and making sure that you're going to have that backup power. A hospital would be another great example. Can't afford to have power go down at a hospital. They're using gas generators or whatever kind of generators they are now. Can't afford to have life support machines go down. So can they find a cost-effective way to produce their own power and store it on site and have some backup power? So I think that's where the industry is going to go, but I just don't know. I don't know. So in the short term, try to make it work, and long term, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. At a high level, we've already kind of touched on it, but what are the environmental and cost-saving benefits of solar energy?
Yeah. On the environmental front, it's really driven by the fact that most of the power that you're getting from the utility company is produced through fossil fuels. And so those generally have carbon emissions that contribute to the environment, global warming, whatever it is. Various levels of people who, ultimately care about that or not, but solar is a mechanism to produce that same power without those carbon emissions. So that would be the environmental aspect of it. And we've seen quite a few businesses that are actually have some demand for solar driven by their customers or their investors who are saying, hey, we want to know that you're being responsible and sustainable in what you're producing for me. And so they're looking to produce power in a cleaner mechanism using solar. On the economic side, as I touched on earlier, it's really about cost offset. So you might purchase a 1 kilowatt hour of power from a utility company at, let's say, 10 cents. And then next year, that's going to go up, 6%, 10%. And so now you're paying 11 cents. And then the next year it's 12 cents, et cetera, right? And you do that, that's each kilowatt hour. You do that, 100,000 times. That cost adds up every year. And every year it's a little more, it's a little more, it's a little more. You purchase solar, and what you're doing is you're basically purchasing 30 plus years of power with that upfront expense for purchasing the solar panels. And those solar panels are going to produce kilowatt hours of power that's going to go straight into your building. And ultimately, at first, it's a larger upfront expense, but over time, you're going to not be continuously purchasing more and more expensive power from the utility. So, you can kind of think of it as like a graph where your cost is higher here and the utility is slowly going up, but then yours just continuously drops over time. At a certain point, whether that's 3 years in or 5 years in or 7 years in, now you've saved so much from not purchasing from the utility that you've offset all the costs that you put out in order to buy the panels. And these panels are generally warranted for 30 years, 25 to 30 years, meaning that you have a guaranteed amount of production coming out of these for several decades. Once you've paid off with your savings, your offset power that you didn't purchase, you basically have decades of free power at that point. So those numbers can really add up over time. If you're a manufacturing business, for example, one of your biggest costs, your cost inputs are generally going to be your materials, your labor, and your power. And so this is a big factor. We hear this from manufacturing companies all the time. They're looking at how can we reduce the price of our products a little bit, be more competitive or improve our margins, whatever it is. Labor costs have their own dynamics, and obviously people want to be paid what they want to be paid. Material costs are largely dependent on the supply chain and what's happening out there. But power cost is something that they can control. They can reduce their power costs over time by going solar and knowing with predictability what is going to be the cost of their power over time, while their competitors may be inflating their costs because they keep buying from the grid. They're deflating their power costs over time.
Who's an ideal candidate for solar?
Anyone who, people ask us a lot of times, who's your target market? And my answer is like anyone that has a building can benefit from it. Now, if the question is where do we see the most demand, that's a little easier to answer. And I would say I mentioned manufacturing. We get a lot of demand there. So you got to have roof space, or we can do what's called carports. It's like an awning that goes over your parking space and put panels on that. Or ground, we could put ground-mounted solar panels. You have to have space to put the panels. Then you want to have sun access. So a lot of buildings have trees around them that cast a lot of shade on the roof or wherever we're going to put the panels. And ultimately, like the cost to install a solar panel, whether your roof is shaded or sunny, is the same. I'm going to charge you the same thing. So you're going to look to put the panels in a place where the sun is the strongest, you're producing the most power. So someone who uses a lot of power, someone who has sun access that they can get the best bang for their buck, someone who's has a longer term horizon, who's thinking not just in the immediate term, I'm month to month, and so therefore I want to keep my costs as low as possible. Someone who's like, hey, I'm going to invest in the future of my business or my home and, bite the bullet now with this upfront capital expense and then know that in the long run, I'm going to reap the rewards of it.
We've already touched on this at length, but data centers are a huge driver for the increase in energy usage and overall demand and cost. The U.S. Department of Energy estimates data centers could consume 6.7 to 12% of total U.S. electricity by 2028, which seems so far away, but is also so close. How specifically can solar help address the growing energy demands driven by AI?
Great question. Every industry conference that we go to, everyone's talking about data centers right now. That's like the big, and I would imagine that's not even just in the solar energy industry. Yeah. Everyone's talking about data centers, AI, it's the big buzz right now. What comes with those data centers is a tremendous amount of utility usage. It's not just electricity. Electricity is a huge part of it, water. It also requires real estate, and there's a lot of, people say communities push back on having data centers installed in their communities. Why would you push back on that? It seems like it'd be a good thing. Well, the reality is that they're gonna drive up the cost of your electricity, possibly your water, because there's only the same certain amount of power being produced, but now the demand's so much higher. And so those local communities are like, hey, maybe there's not enough employment coming out of this to offset the benefit of my power costs going up. I don't care about this data center. Some local farmer might not care. So data centers are being pushed to produce their own power. A lot of the microgrids that I talked about earlier, there's a lot of data centers that are being set up that are setting up their own microgrids. So they'll be completely removed from the grid infrastructure of the local communities to avoid that problem, but not all of them. And the question being, how can solar help offset that? The reality is, I look at it, I don't profess to be a grid engineer expert at the utility level. So I can't tell you the exact impact of, power production on the grid and how that affects where the power is all going. But if I look at it more at like the individual level, if you're thinking for yourself, for your business, these costs keep going up for the utility companies. They're dealing with a lot of challenges, and it's very difficult for them to keep up with it. You can either stay along for the ride and keep paying more and more, or you can get some independence for your own business, for yourself, and say, hey, I'm going to just go ahead and get off this train. I hope that they figure it out. I hope that these communities don't have driven up costs too much from the data centers, but you install solar on your own building, then it doesn't matter to you as much anymore. Now you're getting X amount of power produced for your business at a predictable cost for several decades. You know exactly what it's going to cost you, and whatever happens on the grid level happens.
Yeah, we're living in unprecedented times, but one thing that's for sure is solar is a great alternative. Yeah. 2 final questions before we jump into specifically what you're doing with Hello Sunray. Where are you guys seeing the most growth in solar adoption? And speaking as an Ohioan, as you are yourself, I know I'd love more sunshine. How well suited is Ohio for solar power?
Great question. So I'm gonna answer in reverse. I think number one question we get asked by far is exactly what you just asked. Does Ohio have enough sun for solar? And I get it. I mean, I've lived in Ohio my entire life, so I know what it's like here. It's like 6 degrees outside right now.
It's brutal.
Yeah. But the reality is anywhere in the U.S. at this point has strong enough sun. The technology of solar panels has developed enough that anywhere in the United States, as long as you have, not shade from trees, sun access, you get enough sun to produce solar power in order to offset your utility usage. Now, that's not to say that in Arizona, the sun is not a little stronger than it is here in Ohio. Certainly. And that might help produce a little more efficiency. Same panel might produce a little more power in Arizona than it does here. But on the flip side, it's actually been shown that colder temperatures actually help the long-term efficiency of solar panels. Most electronics benefit from colder temperatures versus hot temperatures. Hot temperatures slowly degrade electronics faster. Colder temperatures actually maintain them better.
That makes sense.
So that's kind of the offset. We might not get as much power production as we would in Arizona, but our panels are likely to last longer and degrade slower because of the weather that we have here. It's not as intense heat. So in the long run, it kind of all balances itself out. The other factor is it's really market dependent, I should say, on what is the cost of power in your area. What's the install cost for solar panels? They might be much more expensive in Arizona than they are here because there's a lot more competition down there and there's a lot more demand for it, and et cetera, et cetera. So all that kind of balances out to the point where people in Ohio, on the commercial level, we're seeing people anywhere from a 3 or 4 year payback period to 6 or 7 years. And like I said earlier, these are 30-year assets. So you make the investment now, it might be 3.5 year payback in Arizona. It's 4 years in Ohio, but it's still 4 years and you have 26 years of power. So it works in Ohio. You asked where we're seeing the most demand. Unquestionably, it's manufacturing businesses. Part of that is probably driven by the fact that we're in Ohio and there's a lot of manufacturing businesses around here. But this is not just in Ohio. I mean, we're getting demand from manufacturers in states New York, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Pennsylvania. As I mentioned earlier, manufacturing businesses are really looking at power costs as one of their main cost inputs. A lot of these manufacturing businesses have nice flat roofs or low sloped roofs that are unobstructed. They've got parking lots around the building, so there's no trees. So they can really benefit quickly from installing power at the most efficient level and starting to reduce their costs over time. We get apartment complexes sometimes, a few schools we've been talking to more and more recently that are driven to try to reduce the costs of their power. But I would say overwhelmingly the demand is coming from manufacturers for us.
Struggling with digital marketing, branding, or website design? Does it seem impossible to navigate the landscape of social media, influencers, and algorithm tweaks? At VividFront, we thrive on challenges like these. When the rules constantly shift, we don't just adapt, we excel. We've cracked the code for growth time and time again, propelling some of the biggest names in e-commerce and B2B to new heights. With our custom digital marketing solutions, we don't just promise results, we deliver them. Ready to take your business to the next level? Visit vividfront.com today to get started.
I feel like we have covered the industry as a whole, so I want to bring this back to Hello Sunray specifically. Why would someone choose you over a competitor? What's your UVP?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not one to ever, denounce any of my competitors. I think there's a lot of great companies out there that install solar that maybe have more experience than us, and I've got nothing negative to say about them. I believe that ultimately there is so much demand right now that no one company could be doing all of it realistically. So I think there's enough, the pie is big enough for all of us right now. That being said, obviously, if I'm competing against one, I want someone to pick me. And what we like to say is that we are very much a service-oriented organization. Transparency and integrity are really important values to us. And, everyone says that, but we really try to live it. Even if that means that, hey, we're going to give you a little harder truth that's going to make the sale look a little less appealing, we're going to be honest with you. We're going to be super communicative throughout the process. But I think that our uniqueness, and this actually has allowed us to land, we just landed a contract with a Fortune 100 company, some large organizations, is because we have this small business feel, this scrappy kind of newer, we've only been around 4 or 5 years now, or team that's, we're really hungry, we're willing to bend over backwards, but we're backed by M7 and a more sophisticated, larger organization with a large track record. So we have stability. We have the ability to meet insurance requirements, compliance, whatever it is. We have the sophistication to be able to take a turnkey approach to working with a customer where we can help you end to end, whether that's your financial modeling or tax planning support. We're not tax advisors, but supporting that, legal, whatever it is, all the way from the design, all the way through installation. And then after installation, we always offer ongoing monitoring and maintenance as well. So when I talked about integrity and transparency, we really live it because we don't just install and then disappear. We continue to communicate with you and continue to stay around. And that's so that you know that, hey, when we're telling you we're going to do this, if we finish the install and you're dissatisfied, we're going to make sure we get it right. We're going to be around.
Best of both worlds. What are some of the most common objections you hear in the sales process, and how do you address them?
Most common objections, well, I would say this is probably the case with anyone who sells a capital expenditure priced item is cost, obviously, and that's financing related. But there are a lot of financing tools that can help people pay for solar. You don't have to just have cash in your bank account. Because like I said, it's a 30-year asset. Generally, you can get the payback, let's say, around 5 years after you make the investment, but it's still a good chunk of change up front. So if you don't have the cash to do it, working with one of the financing companies that we have available, there's some creative financing structures that are unique specifically to solar because it's a long-term predictable asset that you can't necessarily get this financing for other things. So that's generally how we've helped work around it, but also just modeling it out for people and showing them, hey, I know this is a lot, but we always have this slide in our presentations called the cost of doing nothing. And we'll here's your past 12 months expenditures, and we'll show them the graph of the average cost of power over the past 50 years. And we'll say, if you do nothing, let's take your past 12 months expenses. Let's look at where it's going to be in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years. And a lot of times that's like really like, they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about it that way. Now this upfront expense doesn't seem so extreme. The other thing we've gotten is, I don't think it's going to work. How do I know it's going to work? Not as much, nowadays as when we first got started, we were getting that feedback. It seems like more and more people are hearing about solar and trusting it more, but we're in Ohio and it's not, not everyone has a neighbor or a friend that's gone solar. So there's still some uncertainty. And that's where I talk about the warranties that these solar panels have. You can look at any case studies. We have a few customers now. We have specific examples, but the warranties are not just about the technology, but it's about the production. These tier 1 manufacturers that's all that we work with, they are guaranteeing a certain amount of power production. So they're going to say for the next 30 years, I guarantee you're going to at least have this floor of kilowatt hours produced out of these panels. So I tell my customers, you don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe that it's going to work, but this warranty, at a minimum, you're purchasing this warranty, and you can look at case studies and examples of other customers and see that it is almost certainly going to outproduce what that warranty is. But you don't have to trust it. Just look at that floor that you're purchasing. So don't believe it's going to work. It's too expensive. Do we get enough sun? I think I already addressed that one already. Yeah. We have a really sophisticated software that uses like military-grade LiDAR for shade detection and historical NASA weather data to determine, estimate how much sun you're going to get, at any point in the year. So we model things out and show people, hey, you're actually getting more sun than you might have realized, even though we're in Ohio.
Wow. So cool. Have there ever been instances where someone can't afford it, but you do an analysis and you're like, you have too much shade. You're not a good fit, or does that not happen that often? Absolutely,
yeah. That has happened quite a few times, and that's where I think the integrity thing that I talked about before, we really live that, is we have told a few customers, I don't get me wrong, I'll install this if you still want to pay, but I'm going to be honest with you. You have really bad shade here because of these trees back here, or you have a lot of HVAC equipment on your roof, and some of it's taller, it's casting shade, it's just very hard to get a layout that's producing much. We can only offset 7% of your power usage, and ultimately they have to make the decision at that point, does this make sense for me? But we're always going to show them, we have this thing called an irradiance map, that software I was talking about. It can actually show on the roof, like where the sun is the strongest, where there's going to be shading. So we're always moving the panels around to be in the most sun-exposed part of your roof and try to avoid the shaded areas. But yeah, sometimes it just doesn't make sense. Or, people ask, if I can't offset 100% of my bill, is it worth it? Mm-hmm. And the answer I always say is absolutely. Like every kilowatt hour of power produced from solar is a kilowatt hour you're not buying from the grid. It doesn't matter if it's 100 or a million, you're still saving. But of course, there's some upfront costs in installing this that at a certain level, maybe it's not worth it for you. So we generally try to lay that all out to people, help them understand what the drawbacks are, and tell people, hey, we're not a high pressure sales organization either. We understand this is a big expense. It might take you some time to budget and plan for how to pay for this, or it might not make sense now, but you want to revisit in 6 months. Totally fine. Let us show you what the numbers are. Let us show you what we think the potential is. And you tell me, you want me to circle back in 3 months, 6 months, whatever, you want to get started now, great, cool.
That no pressure sales approach, I'm sure it goes a long way. Marketing is a powerful driver of growth, especially in an industry as dynamic as yours. What does your current marketing strategy look like, and what's working well?
All this, I think, ties back to what I've repeated a few times now, which is the integrity and transparency aspect. Our entire marketing strategy, for the most part, is based on referrals. We believe that by doing great work we're going to always have demand. We're going to get referred from our existing customers, or we're going to be able to showcase things we've done. Even if it's not a direct referral, people are going to see these people execute. Excuse me. My dad has always said and teaches us that the most effective marketing is results. So rather than, buying ads everywhere and trying to just, cold reach out emails to people and advertise everywhere, we are really focused on execution. And if that means that we need to grow a little bit slower than maybe if we were to invest heavily in a bunch of advertisements and do a poorer job on the install and execution side, we're fine with growing a little slower in the short term, because we believe by doing the right thing in the long run, we're going to be around for longer. We're going to have a larger pie of opportunities available to us, because we're going to get a reputation, as I believe we're starting to build, of people who get the job done and get it done right.
I think that's the right measured approach to it. Have you ever run ads, though? I'm curious. Did you ever give it a go and you're like, you know what, we're turning this off. We're fully leaning into retention strategies?
Yeah, when we were doing residential, we were testing out some advertising on Facebook and LinkedIn and a few other areas, and we have basic SEO for our website. And, we do try to make sure our website is built out nicely to make us look professional and showcase what we've done. But on the residential side, those ads we were buying, we did test it out, and it wasn't super effective. We were spending a lot of money, and we would get some leads, but we found we were competing against some advertisements that we felt were unethical, maybe. They were promising things that weren't realistic. And so people were seeing those ads and our ads and then contacting us expecting, well, I heard the government will pay for my solar. I heard it's free and so it just was, the quality of the leads we were getting were not great.
Yeah.
And then especially once we pivoted to commercial, we found that most of our commercial customers are not in those places. They're not making large capital expenditure decisions based on an ad they saw on LinkedIn for the most part. And in our experience, I can't speak for every industry. So we have really focused on, content development. We want people to be able to look us up and see these guys know what they're talking about. They've done it. They've executed it, but we're not really advertising so much.
That makes sense. It's always important knowing your audience, and your audience might be different versus someone else's. So I think the content focus, thought leadership angle you guys are really honing in on is the right way, because education and trust is huge in this space. You've built a really strong content presence, which obviously helps support search and AI discoverability. How do you approach content marketing to educate and convert prospects? What type of content do you say works best for you?
Yeah, I would say it's like case studies of projects that we've done are by far the most effective. Our first large commercial install was with a company called Kyocera down in Cuyahoga Falls in the Akron area. And after the install was complete, we actually had like a kickoff party with them and their company. And we had a news company came out and ran a story for us and promoted, that this local manufacturer was going solar, et cetera. But through that, we got plugged a little bit, and we got several people that cold reached out to us that I saw the commercial, I saw the article, whatever. If they're doing it, I'm interested, because, that company has a good reputation. We're posting things on LinkedIn. Here's a case study of a recent install we just completed, and it's like getting the idea in people's heads. Oh, I know that company, or oh, I didn't think about that. Oh my gosh, that works there. Oh, that looks good. And they reach out to us. They call us. Another thing that's huge for us is networking events. I think we actually met at a networking event. We try to get out to as many as we can, whether that's a solar or energy focused event or just a general business event, manufacturing events, things like that. We just try to get out and meet everyone. We find that solar, we have what's nice for us compared to maybe some other technologies that are less mainstream than the concept of solar, is that solar is kind of this buzzword, well-known type of technology that even if you have never worked in it or whatever, you've heard of solar panels, you hear about it, it's in the news. So when we mention to people at networking events we do solar, we almost always pique people's interest. Oh my gosh, that's so cool, tell me more. And we start talking and we meet people through that way and we get referred to somebody. So
it's also a bit easier to grasp, too. I feel like the concept of solar, obviously the intricacies I did not know on all the levels, but I'm like, okay, that makes sense. You're harnessing the power from the sun and things like that. So that's actually how I remembered you from the networking event. I was like, oh yeah, solar.
The solar guy, yeah.
My last marketing question for you is, I know you have a really strong referral-based strategy, but do you have any other marketing goals for this year?
I would like to start producing some like articles of some, I don't know if article is the right word, but blog, whatever you want to say, where we feel like we do a lot of research and we talk to the market a lot and we understand some of the dynamics, some details that are maybe a little bit more in the weeds, more sophisticated than some of the stuff that we see out there. And we'd like to start producing some of our own thought leadership content. I would say that's definitely a goal for this year, in addition to continuing to stack up, our portfolio of case studies.
That's the right move. To close us out, where do you see the solar industry headed over the next decade?
Over the next decade, I do not anticipate power costs dropping anytime soon. And even the utility companies we see at some of these conferences we go to are openly saying it. Like they're trying to catch up with the demand that has skyrocketed so much faster than they anticipated. So in the next 5 to 10 years, I think the cost of power is going to keep going up and up and up. And as a result, I think demand for solar, a solution to getting off of that train of the ever-rising costs, is going to continue to grow as more and more people in the Ohio, the Midwest area start to know that, hey, solar does work here. I have a friend that did it. I have a neighbor that did it. Whatever, the business down the road did it. We think there's going to be growing, I don't know what the term would be, like an adoption comfort level with looking into solar. And then the other factor, as I stated earlier, is I think battery storage and these microgrids is really, it makes it so that the economics of making this investment really pencil out even more efficiently than just installing solar, because it adds an additional factor that is not just cost offset, it's also resiliency. And people keep having these grids going down, blackouts happening. It frustrates people. I think that more and more people are going to look to install a whole package, not just the solar, but the whole entire system, so that I have complete independence with my power at my facility.
We'll see how it plays out. Are you ready to be in the hot seat?
Let's do it.
Best piece of advice for entrepreneurs and builders?
Best piece of advice. I kind of gave this earlier, but I would say you're not smarter than the market. I'm going to repeat that point. Make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Don't think that you are just going to have the easy route. I don't want to go work an office job and work my way up the ladder. I'm going to go be an entrepreneur and I'm going to become a billionaire. I made that mistake. I jumped right into it without having any real world working experience because I had this ambition. And I think that I was able to get there. But I look at it like there's like if the x-axis is time and the y-axis is gets it, figured it out, however you want to define that. If you don't have any experience behind you, that graph going up that y-axis over time is going to be like a low, slow growth. But if you learn and understand and do things the right way, you can be much more exponential with that growth. So if I was to start the same company I did 10 years ago today, I know I would get to where I got to much faster, more efficiently, more successfully. My point being, consider whether skipping the step of building that base layer of knowledge and resources is really the right approach, or if you're doing it because you just don't want to work the way that everyone else is working, maybe reconsider that.
Biggest solar hot take? I was not trying to make a pun, but now that I'm reading this, I'm like, I could kind of see that.
Biggest solar hot take. I would say that pretty much anyone can benefit from solar. And because of some of the financing options that are available, I think it's worth, even if you think like there's no way, I'm just trying to pay my bills this month, maybe we can find a way to reduce your bills without you having to stroke a big check up front. And so maybe you should consider it.
Favorite Cleveland restaurant?
It's actually one that I've recently started to get into with my fiance being Brazilian. It's Batuque.
I've heard that place is amazing.
Yeah, they just opened a new location. I think they have one in Chagrin Falls, but they opened one in Larchmere, and it's just like, she took me there, and I was like, oh my gosh, the food is unbelievable. They're actually going to cater our wedding.
Oh,
and so,
amazing.
yeah, so I'd say try it out if you haven't.
Favorite Cleveland coffee shop?
Favorite Cleveland coffee shop? I would say Edda Coffee Roasters on West 25th.
I'm there all the time.
Yeah, it's pretty close to my house, and I just feel like the vibe in there is really like light, and it's a good vibe. It's big. There's plenty of space to work, so I like going there.
Anthony, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can our listeners go to connect with you and learn more?
Yeah, you can visit www.hellosunray.com, or you can email me at anthony@hellosunray.com, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody and tell you more about solar.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Now it's time to start making moves. Head to vividfront.com/marketingmoves for exclusive marketing materials. Every episode, we add more of our greatest insider secrets to help you move towards success. See you next time.